Hello, my viewers, and welcome back to my channel. Subscribe, like, and feel free to be part of today's conversation. Now, I will come here to a revealing analysis of the crisis in Kenya, where protests have erupted against the government's draconian policies. Now, the speaker, known for his incisive commentary, exposes the truth behind the unrest. He reveals how Kenya's President William Ruto has been a loyal servant of Western interests, imposing devastating neoliberal policies that have impoverished the people. Now, as the people demand his removal, the speaker draws chilling parallels with the situations in Sudan and Egypt, where leaders were scapegoated for the very policies they were forced to implement by multinational corporations and international lenders like the IMF. So get ready for a sobering expose that pulls back the curtain on the machinations of global power players and the puppet leaders who do their bidding. The truth will shock you, but it's essential to understanding the struggles of Kenya and the global struggle for economic justice. Take a look at this video. I will be right back.
Well, the situation in Kenya with the protests. Well, first of all, we'll say that the president of Kenya has long been regarded as a Western client, if not a puppet. And that's not without reason. He has regularly ingratiated himself with the West. He has been pursuing neoliberal economic policies within Kenya that have made the lives of the people increasingly miserable. And so this has resulted, predictably, in protests that began peacefully and turned violent because of the police. The police shot at peaceful protesters. Now, they're calling for the removal of the president of Kenya, William Ruto. Now, what I would say about that situation is that it's similar to the situation before it in Sudan, and it's similar to the situation before Sudan in Egypt, where the people are protesting against the government for policies that the government is implementing, which the government is held hostage to implement in favor of multinational corporations and international lenders. Chief among them, the International Monetary Fund. In fact, the bill that stirred the protests in Kenya initially is basically an IMF bill, a structural adjustment reform, an austerity measure that is being demanded by the IMF of the Ruto government. So my opinion, as was my opinion with regards to Sudan, when Omar Bashir was being blamed for the economic policies that were the austerity measures, the austerity economic policies, the neoliberal policies that he was implementing under coercion in Sudan, and the protests against Sisi because of the neoliberal policies that he was implementing under coercion. My position has always been that these leaders, these politicians, exist to take the blame for the policies that they're implementing on behalf of private sector power. That's why they exist. That's why I call them effigies, because they exist to implement the policies that will make them unpopular, and then they'll take the brunt of the unpopularity. They'll take the brunt of public anger, and then they'll be removed, but the policies will remain, because the source of the policies is the private sector, is the international private sector. It's the OCGFC. It's the Western multinational corporations and lenders, financial institutions, and so forth. Again, specifically, the International Monetary Fund. This is your problem. And now, who is the International Monetary Fund doing what it's doing? Who is it doing it for? It's not doing it for Kenya. We all know that. And it wasn't doing it for Sudan, and it's not doing it for Egypt. So who are they doing it for? And when you identify who they're doing it for, then those are the private sector players, those are the power brokers that it makes more sense to me that the population should be protesting and should be directing their activism and their opposition towards those actors on the political and economic scene in Kenya, not the government. Now, I'm not speaking up in favor of William Ruto. There's a lot of problems with his government, certainly, without question, just as there were problems with the government of Omar Bashir, and there's certainly a multitude of problems with the government of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. But when you're talking about specifically the way that they're managing the economy. You have to understand that they are not the managers of the economy. Their lenders are the managers of the economy, and the lenders are managing the economy in such a way as to benefit Western multinational corporations. So, for example, in Kenya, you should look at Coca-Cola. You should look at General Electric. You should look at Standard Chartered. You should look at Barclays Bank. Look at Safaricom, Nestle, IBM, and look at Toyota. These are the beneficiaries of the economic policies. These are the beneficiaries of neoliberalism. They're the ones who are holding the government hostage. And they're doing it by means of the IMF. So your president, and again, whether it's Kenya, or whether it's Sudan, or whether it's Egypt, or whether it's Pakistan, and many other places around the world, and increasingly, you can say the same thing about countries in Europe. These governments, these politicians, are hostages, and the policies that they're implementing are essentially like when you see a hostage being forced to read a list of demands. You don't get angry at the hostage for the demands that he's making on behalf of the hostage taker. And that's what the government does. That's what your president does. That's what your prime minister is doing. They're just reading the list of demands that they have been told that they that must be met in order for them to not be eliminated. And the one that's going to be eliminated here isn't the president, it's your whole economy. Because the IMF has considerable power to sabotage and cripple your economy if you don't do what they say. That's why it's better for you if you never get involved with them in the first place. And this is why I've said time and time again that it's much better for Muslim countries, for countries in the global south, for countries in Africa, to do business with China, to do business with Russia, while they still can, while those countries are still interested in investing in Africa, in the global south, Latin America, and the Muslim world, and so on, while they still have the money to spend. You ought to take the money from them rather than taking the money from the IMF. Because the IMF and Western lenders generally are not actually interested in you paying them back. They don't want you to pay them back. Because when they loan you money, they're calling it a loan. And you think it's a loan. But what they're actually doing is buying you. So they don't want the money back. They want what they bought, which is your whole country.
Now, the insightful analysis of the Kenyan crisis by our speaker is a stark reminder of the insidious nature of global power dynamics. The puppeting of leaders by multinational corporations and international lenders like the IMF is a disgraceful reality that perpetuates poverty, inequality, and suffering. The Kenyan people's courageous protests against the oppressive policies of President William Ruto are a testament to their resilience and determination. But as our speaker so astutely points out, the removal of one puppet leader will not change the system that perpetuates these policies. The game of musical chairs among puppet leaders only serves to distract us from the real culprits, the private sector power brokers who pull the strings from behind the scenes. It's time to wake up and recognize the true enemy of the people, the neoliberal agenda that prioritizes profits over people. People need to stand in solidarity with the Kenyan people and demand a new economic order that serves the many, not just the few. The struggle for economic justice is global, and together we can create a world that values human life over corporate profits. Now, Kenyan protesters have demanded the resignation of President William Ruto after at least 39 people were unalived and 361 injured in anti-tax demonstrations. Now, the country's military was deployed by the evening of June 25th, and live ammunition was used against demonstrators. Ruto's announcement that he would scrap the tax-heavy finance bill that initially drew the fury of citizens does not seem to have quelled the wave of discontent. Now, nationwide protests continued into a third week on Thursday, with tear gas canisters used on demonstrators and reporters emerging of police beatings in the capital, Nairobi, and the coastal city of Mombasa. Kenya's young activists say they will not be dissuaded by police brutality and have demanded demanded that corrupt officials be fired. Around 35 people suspected of leading demonstrations against the finance bill were reportedly picked up by a specialized police unit. Most were released after protests subsided. Now, Kenya's deputy president blamed the National Intelligence Service for the actions and issued a plea for further demonstrations to be called off. Ruto has defended his handling of the protest. "I have no blood on my hands," he said in a televised roundtable with Kenyan media on Sunday night. The president said that there would be an investigation into the officers' conduct. The president said 2.4 billion shillings, $18.7 million worth of property was destroyed by criminals who took advantage when demonstrators stormed parliament. The legislature buildings, the Chief Justice offices, and Nairobi City Hall were partly burned. Now, Ruto disputed the unaliving toll and added that all persons detained had been released, but local rights groups say some people are still missing. "We maintain that the force used against the protesters was excessive and disproportionate," said Roslyn Odede, the chair of the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. Around 80% of the Kenyan population is below 35 years old, and most who voted for Ruto did so due to his campaign promise of being a self-styled hustler-in-chief who would create jobs and lower the cost of living for ordinary people. Young Kenyans are among the most educated on the continent, but the country's 5% growth rate has not resulted in an abundance of highly skilled jobs. Now, the withdrawn bill sought to raise $2.7 billion in taxes to reduce the country's debt burden of more than $80 billion. It is part of a fiscal pledge to keep in line with a $3.6 billion International Monetary Fund program agreed in April 2021, as well as a $1.2 billion World Bank loan approved in May this year. Now, Ruto's proposed reforms included several tax hikes, such as a digital tax impacting many, since more than 80% of Kenyans use mobile money, or digital payment services accessed via cell phones, hiked wage taxes, a social health tax, and taxes on bread, fuel, specialist hospital care, and small businesses. Now, up to 60% of Kenya's collected tax revenues go to servicing debt. The National Treasury had to borrow additional money for allocations to counties and for school education, Ruto said. The anger among young Kenyans is also directed at the International Monetary Fund and World Bank, which they argue are making decisions for the country that are worsening hardship and creating slower than average growth. They perceive alleged corruption and wasteful spending in government as a greater priority in tackling the country's debt. Now, Kenyan legislators are the second highest paid in the world relative to GDP. The finance bill was described as austerity, but this is not austerity. This is a cash grab from the poor to sustain the lifestyles of the rich. But Ruto insists that the withdrawal of his finance bill will only bring further economic pain for Kenyans, as the government will be forced to borrow 1 trillion shillings, which is $7.6 billion, a 67% increase on what had been planned. What we have done with the finance bill going down is that instead of borrowing 600 billion, we are going to borrow 600 billion plus 346 billion. That is close to $1 trillion, Ruto said. "We are in a very difficult financial position. This is something that the people of Kenya must understand." Now, Kenyans lashed out on social media, drawing again on the failure to provide teacher wages and other public spending. In April, U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai warned that state graft was hampering efforts to attract more U.S. investment. Kenya has not effectively implemented its anti-corruption laws. U.S. firms routinely report direct requests for bribes from all levels of the Kenyan government, flagged a 2024 U.S. report on foreign trade barriers. For months, there had been an increasing divide in international and domestic opinion regarding Ruto, with a clear disconnect between the U.S. government's embrace of the president and his extremely low approval ratings at home. Now, Ruto's political career began murkily. The International Criminal Court once charged him with crimes against humanity, accusing him of inciting the ethnic violence that followed Kenya's 2007 election, but it abandoned the case. Ruto has since reinvented himself as a key U.S. ally. Now, Ruto will need to convince young Kenyans that he has listened to them on government graft and that he is willing to take action. Otherwise, his position looks increasingly untenable. Now, this is what is happening in Kenya as High Court rules in favor of a petition demanding a halt to the use of potentially unaliving weaponry by police. We have finally come to the end of the video, but what do my viewers have to say about the situation in Kenya? Share your thoughts, your contributions in the comment section, and let's have a conversation about what you think about what's happening in Kenya and what the Palm Color Man was talking about in his video. Thank you for always watching, and see you in my next video as I bring you another interesting video.